In the complex world of international trade, tariffs are like unwelcome guests at a party. They disrupt the flow of goods and services, creating tension and uncertainty. But what exactly are tariffs and why should we care? In simple terms, a tariff is a tax imposed on goods imported from another country. Governments use tariffs for various reasons. Some aim to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Others seek to generate revenue or punish countries for unfair trade practices. Whatever the reason, tariffs have real-world consequences. They can raise prices for consumers, hurt businesses that rely on imports, and even spark trade wars. The recent trade dispute between the European Union and the United States highlights the significant impact of tariffs. In this case, the EU has imposed retaliatory tariffs on a range of US imports. This move comes in response to earlier tariffs imposed by the US under the Trump administration. The situation is complex, with far-reaching implications for both economies and the global trade landscape. To understand the current trade tensions between the US and the EU, we need to rewind to 2018. That's when the Trump administration imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU, Canada, and Mexico. These tariffs, justified on national security grounds, were met with immediate condemnation and retaliation from affected allies. The Trump administration argued that these tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs and industries from unfair competition. They claimed that cheap imports, particularly from China, were flooding the US market and putting American steel and aluminum producers out of business. The tariffs were intended to level the playing field and encourage domestic production. However, critics argued that these tariffs were counterproductive and harmful to the US economy. They pointed out that the tariffs would raise prices for consumers and businesses that rely on steel and aluminum as inputs. They also argued that the tariffs would invite retaliation from trading partners, ultimately hurting American exporters. Fast forward to 2025, and the EU has taken a significant step in the ongoing trade dispute with the US. The EU has imposed retaliatory tariffs on a range of US imports, targeting key products like motorcycles, poultry, fruit, maize, wheat, barley, rice, wood, clothing, and even dental floss. These tariffs are designed to inflict economic pain on specific US industries, increasing pressure on the US government to reconsider its protectionist policies. The EU's decision to impose tariffs is a calculated response to what it perceives as unfair and unjustified trade practices by the US. The EU has repeatedly called for dialogue and a negotiated settlement to the trade dispute. However, with the US showing little willingness to compromise, the EU felt compelled to act to protect its own interests. The tariffs, set at an additional 25%, are expected to have a significant impact on the targeted US industries. They will make US products more expensive in the European market, potentially leading to a decline in sales and job losses. The EU hopes that these economic consequences will force the US to the negotiating table to find a mutually acceptable solution. The trade war between the US and the EU is the result of years of tensions and tit-for-tat measures. March 2018. The Trump administration announces tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU, Canada, and Mexico. The EU, Canada, and Mexico denounce the tariffs and vow retaliation. June 2018. The EU imposes retaliatory tariffs on US products like motorcycles, bourbon, and orange juice. July 2018, the US and China engage in a trade war, straining global trade relations. April 2025. The EU approves new tariffs on US imports, including agricultural goods. This highlights the deep divisions and lack of progress in resolving the trade dispute. Section 5. Market jitters, the immediate impact of the EU's move. Unsurprisingly, the financial markets responded nervously to the EU's announcement of retaliatory tariffs. Share prices in industries directly affected by the tariffs, such as US agriculture and manufacturing, experienced a sharp decline. The uncertainty surrounding the trade war and its potential for escalation has rattled investor confidence, leading to volatility in global markets. The immediate impact of the tariffs was a decline in the value of the US dollar against the euro and other major currencies. This depreciation reflects concerns about the potential negative impact of the trade war on the US economy. A weaker dollar makes US exports more competitive, but also increases the cost of imported goods for American consumers. Beyond the immediate market fluctuations, the EU's move has raised concerns about a protracted trade war's longer-term consequences. Economists warn that a prolonged trade dispute between the US and the EU could stifle global economic growth. Uncertainty surrounding trade policy makes businesses hesitant to invest and expand, potentially leading to slower job creation and economic stagnation. Section 6. The EU's perspective, protecting European interests. The EU's decision to impose retaliatory tariffs on US imports is not a step taken lightly. It reflects the EU's commitment to defending its economic interests and upholding the rules-based multilateral trading system. The EU maintains that the US tariffs on steel and aluminium are unjustified and harmful to both economies and the global trading order. From the EU's perspective, the US tariffs are a clear violation of World Trade Organization rules. They argue that the US has not provided sufficient evidence to justify the tariffs on national security grounds, the only exception allowed under WTO rules. The EU has filed a formal complaint with the WTO, challenging the legality of the US tariffs. The EU has repeatedly stated its preference for a negotiated solution to the trade dispute. They have offered to remove tariffs on all industrial goods, including cars, if the US reciprocates. However, the US has so far rejected this offer, insisting that any agreement must address its concerns about the US trade deficit with the EU. Section 7. The US stance: fair trade or trade war. The US government, under the Biden administration, has defended its tariffs as necessary to protect American jobs and address what it perceives as unfair trade practices by the EU and other trading partners. They argue that the global trading system is rigged against the US, leading to massive trade deficits and job losses in American manufacturing. The US has long criticized the EU's agricultural policies, which it claims unfairly subsidize European farmers and make it difficult for American farmers to compete in the European market. They also argue that the EU's regulatory barriers, such as strict food safety standards, are protectionist measures disguised as consumer protection. The US administration insists that it is not seeking a trade war, but rather a fairer trading relationship with the EU. They argue that the tariffs are a negotiating tactic to bring the EU to the table and secure a better deal for American workers and businesses. However, critics argue that the tariffs are counterproductive and will ultimately harm the US economy by raising prices for consumers and businesses. Section 8. Global ripples, China and the wider trade landscape. The trade dispute between the US and the EU is playing out against a backdrop of rising global trade tensions. The US-China trade war, initiated during the Trump administration, continues to simmer, with both sides imposing tariffs on billions of dollars worth of each other's goods. This ongoing trade conflict has created uncertainty and volatility in global markets, disrupting supply chains and dampening economic growth. China, the world's second largest economy, has not remained passive in the face of US tariffs. They have retaliated with tariffs of their own on US imports, targeting key agricultural products like soybeans and pork. The trade war has hurt both economies, but it has also created opportunities for other countries willing to fill the void left by US and Chinese products. The EU, caught in the crossfire of the US-China trade war, is seeking to chart a more independent course. They are pursuing free trade agreements with other countries and regions, such as Japan and Latin America, to diversify their trade relationships and reduce their reliance on the US market. Section 9. Conclusion. An uncertain future for global trade. The trade dispute between the US and the EU, along with the US-China trade war, casts a shadow over the global economy. These conflicts threaten the rules-based trading system that has underpinned global prosperity for decades. The situation highlights the need for dialogue and cooperation to prevent further escalation. The future of global trade hangs in the balance Will we see a retreat into protectionism or a renewed commitment to open markets? The answers will have profound implications for the global economy. Leadership, compromise, and a commitment to fair trade rules are essential. The US and the EU must work together to strengthen the global trading system. Only through cooperation can we ensure a prosperous future for the global economy.